Okay. So thanks everybody for joining us today on the new officially preview for the 2021 Google Developer Group Cloud Los Angeles. We are excited to have you guys here, and we know different people will be joining us on the replay because we're in the middle of a pandemic still. So thank you guys for showing up. We appreciate it. Thanks to Tamas, our keynote speaker. Just to give you a quick overview of what's going on for the next few days. This is a Chrome Developer Summit Extended 2020, hosted by Data 360. We're a Google developer partner and partner with G Suite and a number of other programs with Google. The agenda's in the comments. Read through the I think somebody's unmuted. Let's see. Welcome. So this is sponsored by Data 360. You can read about us in the agenda. We have a few different things that we'll share about the company towards the rest of the presentation. But one of the things that we want to share is about progressive web apps because it connects to what we do. So we'll talk about our platform as a service as well as the sponsors of the event. And then also we'll share a little bit about what's great about the Chrome Dev Summit coming up for later today in the sessions. There's some really great content that was out there for the summit, and we will share about that. Tamas today is going to talk about progressive web apps. We will have a link here that I'll share in the chat about what are progressive web apps. And you can learn a little bit more about that. And we'll talk a little bit about that after Tamas's presentation. And from there, I'll let Tamas take it from there.
All right, thank you very much. So first of all, good evening for me, and good morning or good afternoon to all of you. And I'm glad to be here, and thank you very much for this opportunity. So I'm going to do a presentation to you, which is going to be about progressive web applications. And I think I have about 30 minutes, and I may have prepared way too much, but we'll see if I can squeeze everything into this precious 30 minutes. So without anything further to do, let me share my screen. And then I'm going to go through a couple of slides just to sort of set the scene for you. So hopefully you now see, let's just go through this again. So hopefully you now see a presentation. I'm hoping that's the case.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, we're going to go through progressive web applications, but before we do that, let me quickly introduce myself. So my name is Tamas. I work as a developer evangelist at a company called Cloudinary. I'm a Google developer expert, so that's why I'm here in the first place. And I'm a GD in web technologies, and I also run a training business that I own, which is a small business that does sort of workshops for customers on various web technologies as well. So today we are going to talk about progressive web applications. Now, as I said, I prepared a couple of slides just to set the scene for you, because there may be some people out there who are not really familiar with progressive web apps, so you may not really understand what they are. So I'm going to lay down the fundamentals for you, and then we're going to change to my code editor and to my browser, and we're going to see some interesting examples of progressive applications. Now, the Chrome Dev Summit was mentioned. I also encourage you that you take a look at all of the talks, but if you are interested in progressive web apps, there were, I think, at least 3 talks about progressive web applications. So if you're interested in this topic, I do recommend that you take a look at those as well. So what are progressive web apps, right? So progressive web apps, at least in my definition, are just websites that have app-like features. Now, what are those app-like features? So if you think about an application that you use on your phone, those applications have certain traits. such as the fact that they are installable, they are available offline, so they work without a network connection, and they're also re-engageable, meaning that the applications are going to be sending notifications to you, and just with the tap of your finger, you can go back to that application. Now, most of these traits are not true for websites, right? Websites you don't necessarily install. In fact, you don't actually install a website. Websites are not available offline because if you don't have a network, you can't access a website. And these days, websites do send notifications, so that maybe is one of the sort of common points. But think about these progressive web apps as websites that have these app-like behaviors, these app-like features available for you. Now, sometimes you may refer to a progressive web app, or you read an article that will refer to a progressive web app as a hybrid application. And the reason why they call them hybrid application in the first place is because if you create a progressive web app, that's going to work both on your mobile phone as well as on a desktop computer. And on your mobile phone, it is going to feel like a native application, an application that you have installed from a Google Play Store or from the Apple Store on an iOS device. And what's really great with this approach, if you think about it behind the scenes, you have one single code base. You essentially create a web application, you add a couple of things to that web application, which will enable a native mobile-like experience. So there's no need to create an app using Swift or Kotlin or a very specific language. You can just have one single code base, and then if someone opens your websites or in a browser, it's going to be like a web application. If they decide to install your progressive web app on their phone, it's going to act like a native application. So how does that work? So essentially the key drivers behind progressive web applications are a set of APIs that you can find in modern browsers. And those are the service worker and the service worker API, the cache interface or the cache API, and there are also the push and notification APIs, which you can utilize in progressive web applications. And there's a lot of additional APIs. In fact, I think what I'm linking to here is one of the talks from Google where they present sort of a timeline on the future of progressive web applications. So progressive web applications can now access file systems, they can access downloads, they can access workers, they can access a lot more. So they are even getting closer to be acting like a native application on your mobile. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go through these sort of three core pillars of progressive web apps, or the enablers for the progressive web apps, which are service workers, the cache interface, and then the push and the notification APIs. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. In fact, I may have removed that from my slides. So just the service worker and the cache interface, or the cache API, are going to be the two that we're going to be focusing on. So the service worker, very, very simply put, acts as a proxy between your browser and the internet, right? So, and I have an asterisk here for the service worker. So even though in this figure, I separated out the cogwheel, the service worker outside the browser, the service worker is part of your browser, right? It's not a separate entity, it is part of that. But essentially, because it acts as a proxy, what it allows you to do is to intercept the sort of standard request and response cycle that goes between your browser and the internet or a website that you want to visit. So let's assume you want to go to example.com. So you enter that in your browser then executes an HTTP GET request to example.com. The example.com server receives that request and sends the response back, and then you see the result in your browser. So that's the typical life cycle, right? Now, what the service worker allows you to do is to sort of stop the outgoing requests, do something with it, and then send it through. And then the same is true when the when the response comes back. So when there's a response, the service worker can stop, do something with it, manipulate it, massage it, whatever you set it up to do, and then sends that updated response back to the browser. And this is essentially the key to enabling offline features for service workers, or one of the two key features, because the other key feature is the cache API, or the cache interface. So there is a separate cache. So sometimes people get confused with this, but the browser has a cache that, if you browse for website, it stores some cookies and whatnot. That's one thing. But there's also programmable cache available for browsers via the cache API that I just mentioned. And what this allows you to do is to store data inside your browser. And of course, if you store data in the browser's cache interface, you can retrieve that as well. So you can store HTML files, JavaScript files, CSS files, fonts, images, videos, literally anything. And what's great about this is that the service worker and the service worker API has access to this cache interface via the cache API. So what this means is that if you add all these entities, all these elements into your browser cache programmatically, if you don't have access to the internet, then you can still retrieve that information from the cache. Okay, we're going to take a look at an example of it, but this is essentially one of the key and most important things for service workers. Now, believe it or not, this functionality to make any site work offline is just a couple of lines of code. And we're going to go through an actual example, but what I've done, I prepared sort of the key bits that are needed. So I mentioned that the service worker is available in modern browsers. So in order to make sure that the service worker is actually supported by the browser, you should always start with this if service worker in navigator conditional. So you want to make sure that the browser is supporting the service worker. And you just call these couple of lines of JavaScript where you basically register and activate the service worker. Okay, this is just standard JavaScript. There's nothing special in here, and we're pointing to this file called the serviceworker.js. Okay, so that is going to be our service worker file. That is the file that is going to contain the actual functionality for our progressive web app. So how would that file look like? So here's an example of that. We basically collect a set of files. Okay, so we collect index.html, app.js, and app.css. We then create a cache. So you see we have a cache name called myCache, and then we have an install event. And then in that sort of callback, we have caches.open cache name, then cache.cache add all files. So we basically take all these files from the files array and we add that to the cache. So that's one part of the service worker. And then a couple of additional lines. We then have an event listener for the fetch event. And basically this line here that you see, which is response or fetch event of request, is the most crucial part in your service worker. So that line essentially says, if there is a fetch request, so an HTTP GET request for a resource, try to find that in the cache. If you find it in the cache, then return it, and then just serve it up for the browser. If you don't find it, then just execute that fetch event against the network. Okay, so that's the key there. So if you have some cached assets, those are going to be served from the cache. If you don't have them, then the service worker will attempt and go out and do the fetch over the network. So hopefully you now see, and as I said, we're going to get a little bit more in depth with this, but hopefully now you see that if you have this setup and you cache the appropriate files for your site, under no circumstances you will see good old dinosaur. And I'll pause here just for everyone to laugh a bit. So that's not a dinosaur, that's a dinosaur, like as in down, no internet. Doesn't matter. You should never see the screen, essentially. But there's a little bit of a problem here. Even though the code that I showed you may seem very lightweight, very easy to understand, the service worker API is very, very complex. There are lots of edge cases that you need to be aware of. So how do you update stale data in your cache? How do you make sure that if a particular file gets updated, you pull that from the network, you then update the cache, which one should come first, and then how do you make sure that your progressive web is now up to date to all of your users, right? So there's lots of edge cases, there's lots of scenarios that would require you to have sufficient knowledge of the service worker API and really good programming skills to get this up and running. Now, luckily for us, Google has created an open source JavaScript library, which they call Workbox.js. And the Workbox.js, or I'm just going to call it Workbox. So Workbox essentially acts as a wrapper on top of the service worker and the cache interface and many additional APIs that you may want to use in order to create very compelling progressive web apps. Okay, so with this Workbox library, what you can do is essentially create amazing progressive web apps without having to worry about the very low level details of the service worker API and what to do in what circumstances. Now, this particular library is slightly more complicated to use. However, it is really, really powerful. So it allows you to do pre-caching of your static assets. It allows you to cache API requests in just about 6 lines of code. So using these 6 lines, I can essentially cache an REST API response inside my browser and then serve that up. I can also cache entire images, and just using this expiration plugin, I can essentially set limits for my cache as well. And again, just with a couple of lines of code, I can cache my images. I can set up a caching policy for that. After 60 entries, you will get this. You won't get more than 60 entries of images inside your cache. If the 61st one arrives, then the last one gets deleted. This happens automatically, right? And all you need to do is write just a couple of lines of code. Whereas without Workbox, it would be a lot more difficult. So I want to spend another 2 or 3 minutes on the slides and then jump into the actual examples. So, progressive web apps have the term progressive in them. And the reason why it's called progressive is because they actually refer to progressive enhancements based on certain conditions. So for example, if the user is offline, then you should still give them some sort of a functionality. And if they are online, you should give them more functionality. If they are on a Wi-Fi network as opposed to a 3G network, you could give them even more functionality, even more sort of, maybe more visuals. So essentially, what we're talking about here is giving your users a progressive experience of using your app based on their conditions, okay? Whether they are on a 3G network or offline or have an older device, etc., etc. And one particular aspect of that, and that's kind of my second focus of my talk, is the visuals, the images and the videos that you would have inside your applications. Because if you remember, and I have this analogy about cats, right? So a couple of years ago, or maybe a decade ago, people just used to say, oh, I have a cat, right? And then maybe 5 years ago, they started posting photos of the cat. These days, people are posting videos of the cat, right? So the web is becoming increasingly visual. But the problem, or not necessarily a problem, but it's difficult to navigate this maze of media on the web, because there are lots of various formats for images, for videos, right? So there's JPEG, WebP, JPEG 2000, MP4, WebM, MKM, lots of formats out there. So how do you decide which one's good? How to create all of these formats? So it's really difficult to manage all of these, to optimize your application to serve these images. Another example is, what if you have a slow network? So what if your user is on a 3G connection as opposed to on a Wi-Fi connection? Then probably you should serve a lower quality image for them, because what I don't like, and I think that should be one of the key takeaways from this talk as well, is that every particular user should have similar experiences when they use your application. So as opposed to not showing them any sort of images, try to show them lower quality images. And you see 2 flags here, QAuto low, QAuto best. I'm going to get back to those, and we're going to see what that does. Just remember these sort of values, the 570, 9.9, and 6.8, and then QOTO and QOTO best. We're going to get back to this in just a second. Okay, so time to do a couple of demos. I hope you can still hear me, see me, and demo time. So we tested this. If the font size is not large enough, then please let me know. But I'm hoping this is going to be good enough. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Large.
Pardon?
Maybe a little bit larger, Thomas.
Maybe a little bit larger. Sure thing. Let's do 7. This should be.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, perfect. So I have prepared 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sort of different applications. And we're going to start with this one, which is called basic, right? So I have a very complicated HTML page, which is 17 lines. I have a CSS file, which is again super complex with only one particular rule. And I have an app.js, which is going to just register the service worker. In fact, the code that you see here is exactly the same that you saw in the slides. Inside this index HTML, just notice I have an H1 element. And for now, I'm just going to comment out app.js, right? So we're not going to use the service worker. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to serve this here on port 8080, open up my browser and go to localhost 8080. Oops, localhost 8080. Oh wait, I'm in the wrong folder. Basic and HTTP server. And now go back to the browser. Okay, so as expected, I have the H1 message service worker, and it's all red because, as I said, I apply that style to the H1 elements, right? So pretty straightforward, nothing really complex here. But what happens if I go to network and I pretend to be offline, right? So I am, cutting the network from this particular application. So I come to localhost 8080, and I'm presented with Mr. Dinosaur. Okay, no internet. For those of you who don't know, if you hit the spacebar, you can play a game. Okay, so just FYI, if someone didn't know this, but that's not something what you want to do. You want to actually interact with an application, right? So how can we make that happen? Well, let me put this service worker thing back, right? So we're going to register a service worker.js file. I'm going to enable this line, and let's open service worker.js. And notice that I deliberately not going to cache the CSS file because I want to show you something here. But again, the code that you see here is exactly the same that I showed you on the slide. Okay, so we're going to be installing the service worker, create a cache, put all the files, these files, to the cache, and then on the fetch event, we're going to say if the cache contains that particular asset, then serve it, otherwise try to go out to the network. So let's see what is going to happen. First of all, I'm going to come back to my application, go back online, and when I refresh my application, I get the service worker is good to go message, which is one of my console log messages. And if I go to the application tab in Google Chrome and select the cache storage, notice that I have a cache with the name my-cache, which is exactly the cache that I have, sorry, where is it? Here, I have created, which means it should contain app.js and index of HTML. Perfect. So let's see what happens if I now go offline, right? Cutting the network again, just hitting refresh. And notice I no longer get the dinosaur, but instead I'm getting the service worker message. So there is something that is being returned to me from the cache via the service worker because I have enabled it and I have cached the assets. Now, the reason why you don't see the CSS applied is purely because for demonstration purposes, I did not add that asset to the cache. But if I add it back and I rerun this whole thing again, So I go online, I do a refresh. App.css gets added to the cache now. So if I cut the network connection and just do a refresh, notice that I get the entire content of the page back, even though clearly I do not have a network connection. Okay, and in a sense, this is, you know, what the service work and what progressive web applications are all about. Now, of course, this was a very simple example. Okay, so let's sort of level this up and go a little bit deeper. And I think in order to save some time, I am going to open this particular example, which now uses, you know, workbox.js, and it is slightly more complicated, but it's more representative of what a progressive application would look like. So what I'm going to do is start up my little HTTP server. So it says something's running on localhost 8080. Now, because I installed a service worker on that port already, I need to come and clear storage. So just want to make sure that I start from scratch, and I need to go online. And let's see what we get on localhost 8080 now. Okay, so what we get here is a made up site that I created, right? So it has a little menu and everything. And it's a news website, right? So there's, you know, a couple of news that got added a couple of hours ago, and you can click, you know, read more to actually read a particular article. Notice it has images as well, so it's, you know, it's like a proper news site. And notice that it also has a read later button. So first of all, let's see what happens if I go offline. So I'm going to go offline, and notice that my application still works, but I still see the news pieces here, but they are grayed out, indicating it to me, and I can't even click on the read more or any of these buttons. So this is a visual cue. It's an indication to me that yes, the application is here. You know, I can still use it just as before. However, these particular articles were not cached. And this is why exactly we have this read later button. So if I go online and I say, you know, maybe I'm browsing this site and I know that there's a big tunnel that comes up and I'm commuting to work, pre-pandemic, of course. And I want to, you know, make sure that even in the tunnel where I will not have network connection, I want to read a particular article. So I'm going to say, oh, I'm interested in this baseball player thing. So I'm going to click read later, and I'm interested in, I don't know, this tennis article. So I'm going to click read later. So now we enter the tunnel, so we go offline. And notice that these two articles were also made available offline. So even though these other two are not available, I can click on read more on this article and just keep on reading, even though I do not have any network connection available. And I can come back here and I can read this other one as well. Again, full article is here, and I can just go back. And if I go online, then of course I can read, you know, just use this particular site as you would use any normal web application. Now, another thing that's added to this particular application is related to images. And I talked about this Q auto thing. So let me do a very quick demo for you using this particular image. Okay, so I don't know, a quick question. If I do this, do you see me zooming in, or is there no change?
We see the zoom.
You see the zoom, perfect, because that's what I'm going to be using here. So here we have this particular image, which you saw in the presentation as well. And this image is 583 kilobytes in its size, okay? And it is, because of its content type, it's an image JPEG, okay? Now, this particular image has been uploaded to this service called Cloudinary. Okay, so Cloudinary allows you to upload images and videos and other media assets it's a cloud solution, so you can upload your assets there. And it allows you to serve, optimize, and transform these particular assets. So one thing that I can do is just say Q_auto. So Q_auto is short for automatic quality, which means that this particular image is going to get a reduced quality. So Cloudinary on the server side is going to analyze this particular image that we have, and is going to remove all the unnecessary pixels, that are not needed for displaying this image. In other words, it's going to reduce the quality in a way that is not going to affect the human eye, right? So remember, we started from 583 kilobytes. So I'm just going to hit enter. And here we have the same image, right? The image did not change, but the size went down to just 50 kilobytes, which is a massive reduction in size. And furthermore, Cloudinary allows you to say, okay, do you want this Q_auto to be echo, which is going to be an even sort of lower quality, but still, not too bad, but the size goes down to 41 kilobytes. So effectively what this means is that based on the network conditions and the network connection speed of your user, you could serve different type of images for your users, right? So if they are on a Wi-Fi, you can send almost like an HD quality image. If they are on a 2G connection or a very, very slow connection, you should send maybe a 41 kilobyte image, still allowing them to enjoy the visual experience of your application. So the application that I showed you, in fact, does that. And I can show this to you by clicking on application and looking at the cache storage. So currently, the images that you see on this page are placed in a separate cache called Cloudinary Images. And let's just take a look at this baseball image. Okay, so this is 69,000 bytes. Okay, so let's just remember 69 as the number. Okay, so this is a JPEG image, 69 in size. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to assume that we are just first-time visitors for this site, but we're going to be loading this site using slow 3G. So we're going to pretend that we are on a slow 3G connection. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to load up this site, and it's going to take a bit more time to load, of course, because slow 3G is in fact slow. But at some point, we will get, we already have the text, and the images are, of course, being downloaded behind the scenes. And here they are, right? So it's a visual experience. It took, about maybe 15 seconds for everything to load up. Now, if I click on application and I click on cache storage, I need to do a refresh because these images get cached for the second time. So if I do that, I will get a Cloudinary image cache again. And what I would like you to notice is that the images that get loaded into that cache, come on cache, where's my, okay, wait, cache, let's do this. Okay, there they are, 69. Okay, so network slow 3G refresh. So theoretically, what should happen, and it's not really happening, is that, or maybe it's a different app that I'm looking at. Could be a totally different one because I prepared another one, didn't I? Doesn't matter. What should have happened, and I'm not going to investigate this right now, but instead I'm going to show you the code for this, is that inside the service worker, I have access to something called the Network Information API. The Network Information API is one of the sort of newest web APIs that are available, which allows you to capture the connection speed for your users. And by capturing the connection speed, what you can do, and in fact, I created this entire plugin for this. So we're going to take a look at the plugin code instead. So what this allows you to do is to serve up different quality images based on the network connection that your users have. Okay, so I'm going to go right here. So this is the code. So basically what we do is we're looking for don't worry about this, but we're looking for Cloudinary images essentially. Then I check for the existence of the network connection API in my browser and only run this code if that network connection API is available. And then I say if 4G, so these are the values that it can return to you, 4G, 3G, 2G, and slow 2G. These are the potential values that come back from the network connection API. So 4G, I will say Q auto good. So if someone is on a fast connection, I want a better quality image. If, however, someone is on a very slow connection, I want a low quality image, okay? And what the service worker allows me to do is to capture the outgoing request from the browser for the image. And then when the browser, remember that diagram that I showed you. So when the request goes out, the service worker stops the request and says, before I send that to the internet, in this case, before I send that to Cloudinary, let me take a look at your network connection information. If it's 2G, then hang on, I'm going to inject this new part, this Q auto value into the URL, and I'm going to resend the new request to the new URL. So it's basically just going to stop, change the outgoing URL based on the connection, and then send that to Cloudinary. And by the time it arrives to Cloud or any other service, it will have that modification in place. So that image service in our case is going to send back a lower quality or higher quality image based on this particular information. Okay, so hopefully this made sense. I think I'm going to run out of time very shortly, but essentially you can do the same with videos as well, for example, right? So I have this example. I'm going to put this on GitHub so you will have access to this, but essentially you can do the same with videos as well. So you can actually tell the service worker to cache videos, right? So I'm going to quickly show that to you so we at least see that example. To an HTTP server on this one. And I need to go through this exercise of cleaning my cache again. So I'm going to say clear the cache or site data, go back online. I'm going to refresh. So here's a video that we have, right? So I can play this, it's available. Now I go offline, refresh the page, and I still have my video available. I can still play, skip, and just watch the video, even though I'm offline. Okay, so this is also possible. There's another strategy that you may want to sort of think about because, and it's kind of related to Cloudinary, but I'm going to show this to you. So let's assume that you have this URL for the video, which ends with an MP4, right? So we're playing this video, and what I can do is I can just change the MP4 extension in Cloudinary to say JPEG, hit enter, and then what I'm going to get is just a frame from that video, which is just an image. So here's something maybe that you can do as a homework is to think about a strategy where if the user's network connection is below, is 3G or below 3G, instead of showing them a video, you show them just an image. And you can do this just by doing a extension change in Cloudinary. Okay, so to summarize, we'll find a way to share these slides with you as well, of course. I have lots of resources here, right? So adaptive image loading is something I talked about. Google has PWA information all over the place. So there's various links to PWA resources essentially. Offline cookbook, talks about caching strategies. And I'm going to update this GitHub link with these sort of examples that I showed you because I think the video one's missing from here. And then you can take a look at the code as well on your own. Now, there's one extra thing that I prepared, and I actually recorded this, which is, again, we talked about how a progressive web app acts like a native application. It acts like a mobile app. So what I've done, I basically record this video. So I open up the very same sort of application that you saw on Safari or in an iOS device. So this is a news page that I created. I can read the articles. This particular example misses the images. I didn't add that. And notice you have this thing called add to home screen. So I'm going to add that. Now, oopsie, let me just pause the video. No, so where's the, there it is. I'm just going to pause the video right here. So this information that you see, the news, locals, the icon, that's again configurable. There's a file called manifest.json, and in that JSON file, you basically specify the name and all these values that you see here. Okay, and I'm going to click add, and then notice how I now get this icon. And if I tap that icon, I get this native app-like functionality on my phone, right? And I can still read the articles and I can still browse this particular site. Okay, but this is now sort of an installed progressive web app on my phone. Okay, so that's all what I had for you today. I hope you enjoyed this particular sort of overview and 101 on progressive web applications. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but I would be more than happy to take a few. If we don't have time, or if you have a question at a later point in time, you can find me on Twitter. My DMs are open, so I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have about PWAs, Cloudinary, anything related to the web, pretty much. So thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Really appreciate it. I think we're a little short for questions today because I want to make sure to get everybody on to the next stop that they have for this hour. But thank you. That was very helpful. And for those people who are brand new, what was the tool you were using to navigate between the code and turning things on and offline? How were you doing that? Because I know we have some real newbies on the phone. Or on the line.
How I was doing?
Where the console that you were using to update things?
Oh, so that's a Visual. So I'm using Visual Studio Code as my code editor, and that has a built-in terminal which you can access by the. I'm in a Mac, so it's like the control and the tilde character combo, but it's basically called a built-in terminal in Visual Studio Code.
Yeah, we had actually one quick question. I'll let it through. Jason says, service worker concept is amazing and it's not new, but why no much bigger company is using it? I have an answer for that, but I'll let you answer too.
Okay. I think that's not true that not many big companies are using it. There are big companies that are using it, but sometimes you don't even realize that they are using it. Google has multiple services that are using it. Here's one example for you, which I didn't even know. So one of the Nordic countries, I can't remember, Finland, Norway, Sweden, one of them, the official public transportation app is actually a progressive web app, and that has native features, which is like accessing Bluetooth on your device. And it runs as a progressive web app. So there are multiple examples of companies running progressive web apps. So it's definitely something that is out there, but sometimes you just don't even realize it's a web app. Plus, progressive web apps are installable from the Google Play. So I think as of maybe a year ago, Google Play opened up their platform, so you can now actually submit progressive web apps just like how you would submit a native app. So you wouldn't know whether you installed a PWA or a native app.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say at Data 360, we're working with a lot of retailers on their digital transformation and upgrading apps, and some of them are establishing apps for the first time, and progressive web apps is an amazing option for most of them. So really quick, I'll just share a little bit about the rest of the next few days. And some things to highlight from the Chrome Dev Conference, and then we'll wrap it up until 4. So some of the things you can check out while we're apart today is, let's see if you guys can see my screen. Okay, can you guys see my screen? Watch reloading here. So, so those of you who don't know me or our organization, my name is Marie. I'm the CIO and one of 3 co-founders of Data 360. We're a Google partner, much like Cloudinary. And we run Google Google Developer Group Cloud Los Angeles. I know it's a mouthful. GDG Cloud Los Angeles. And we are the host of today's event. And you just heard the introduction of PWAs from Tamas. I put a link to the agenda in the chat so you guys can see the rest of the agenda. We will be talking about more about core web vitals and progressive web apps and those sort of things. Data 360 is also one of many tools you can use in your progressive web app. So we're really excited to share about that because our system allows you to connect to AI and machine learning functionality using progressive web apps. So we'll also post a link to our information deck so you can check it out. We're a big believer in progressive web apps, and so we're excited to share more with you. Some of the things I also want to share really quickly before we wrap is there are some really great videos from the Google Chrome Developer Summit that are happening and really help you understand more about how to work with different tools. So we'll go over some of these over the course of the next couple of days. But I suggest you check out the next level web apps on the desktop, as well as extending CSS with Houdini, which Houdini is amazing, and talking about how to work virtually and using Chrome for that purpose. And then of course there's the day one recap and the Chrome and web in 2020 keynote. So check all of those out. I'll also post a link to the what are progressive web apps with some more information, details on that. But you can see they have a lot of benefits, and it really helps in compatibility with different, making your app compatible with different systems without having to develop everything natively with different code kits. So that's really great. The Houdini site, there's a Houdini site we're sending to you, which is part of one of Google's developers information, but it talks about how to add fun things to your site, like sparkles and confetti for those who are super girly girl, Tesla effects and particle connections and all these fun things. So you can see that with all these different Chrome tools, you can add a lot of things that are really interesting to your site and do some really amazing fun things. And then lastly, if you want kind of a summary of what happened with the whole conference, there's a link as well for the overall summary. So make sure to check that out and kind of see what's happening. One of the biggest things that we're not talking about today, but we'll highlight tomorrow, is privacy. So there's more work on browser privacy, and actually one of the more surprising things, if you guys know about the biggest complaint about Google, is that they're looking at how to phase out third-party cookies. And so that's a lot of things. Those are the things that are responsible for bugging you on the web. So there's some changes happening around that as well. So it should be exciting to learn all these things over the next couple of days. Again, really encourage you guys to check out everything and share with others, because there are a lot of really great new tools that are out there, and progressive web apps are not new, but they're certainly progressing, no pun intended, progressing more and more each year. So we love to share all those things with you and help you develop some amazing things for yourself, or if you have clients or your customers. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. If there are any questions, I think we have like 2 minutes maybe for if there's one other question for Tamas or us. Okay, well, I think that we'll wrap it up. We will send out more info about all these different links, and we'll see you back here at 4 o'clock. Different link, same people. All right. Have a great night, or great afternoon, and great night to Tamas. And have a great afternoon,
rest of
everyone.
your day.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.